Welcome to our channel, where real, emotional, and dramatic stories come to life in the most vivid way possible. If you're passionate about justice, courage, and fierce confrontations, then you're in exactly the right place. Before we dive into today's story, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an episode. And be sure to leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the story's events and message. I used to think the worst thing that could happen to a farmer was a failed harvest or a power outage in the dead of winter. But no, turns out the real nightmare is waking up one morning to find your farm being raided like you're suddenly part of a political drama you never agreed to star in. And it didn't arrive with sirens blaring or flashing red and blue lights. No, it came in the quietest and most suspicious way possible. A single sheet of paper nailed to my wooden gate with a 6-inch rusty nail, more of a warning shot than a legal notice. And in truth, it wasn't legal at all. The paper read, "Emergency Seizure Notice, violation of Clause 14D, signed at the bottom with a name I'll never forget, Karen, president of the Simmons Valley HOA. The ironic part, I don't live in Simmons Valley. I live next to it. My land is entirely outside their jurisdiction. At least it was, until Karen redrew the borders herself, like some medieval queen with a ruler and an imperial fantasy. At first, I thought it was just a cheap scare tactic, a typical paper threat meant to intimidate. That was until a sleek black SUV with no license plates drove up my dirt road, and 2 men in tactical gear stepped out. One held a clipboard, the other carried a firearm, and had that buzz-cut look that made every instinct in me go on high alert. They claimed to be perimeter inspectors from the HOA. I asked if they had a warrant. Their response? A tangled mess of legal-sounding nonsense that only convinced me more. They weren't here to enforce anything. They were here to trespass. But in that moment, caught between confusion, anger, and suspicion, I suddenly realized something. They weren't here to inspect. They were here to start a game of chess. And my farm? It was the first square on their board. But they forgot one crucial thing. I don't play to lose. As I pulled the notice from the gate, a strange wind passed through, not from the weather, but from the unmistakable stench of danger and absurdity seeping through every line of that cold, italicized print. Beneath the title, Notice of Violation, was a list of accusations so ridiculous they wouldn't even make it into a farm management video game. Improper livestock containment, non-compliant fence design, and unregistered electrical connections. Accompanying them was a fine of over $4,700 and a deadline: vacate the land by Friday, or face immediate forcible removal. The more I read, the clearer it became. This wasn't just arrogance. This was a calculated land grab. The final line of the notice confirmed it, stamped with the hasty but commanding signature of Karen, the self-proclaimed commander-in-chief of the Simmons Valley HOA. As if the fact that my property didn't even fall under her HOA was a mere footnote, an inconvenient detail, easily dismissed in her grand plan of expansion for the public good. I didn't know whether to laugh or call the cops. But I didn't have much time to decide, because just 30 minutes later, that same SUV pulled back into my yard. They didn't ask for my name, didn't offer a greeting, just raised a clipboard and announced they were authorized to conduct an emergency expansion perimeter inspection. I stood firm at the gate to the goat pen, my voice cold as steel. No warrant, no entry. The one with the gun gave a smug smirk. The clipboard guy pulled out his phone, started recording, and threatened that I was obstructing an official operation. I smiled. Good, I like paperwork, and I have security cameras. So go ahead, record all you want. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was scared, but because I knew. When they turned their backs and drove off, it wasn't the end. It was the opening move in a quiet war. And I'm not the kind of man who backs down just because someone shows up wearing khakis and a plastic name tag. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, not because of the rooster, but because something deep inside told me yesterday wasn't over. And sure enough, just after the clock ticked past 7:15, the crunch of tires on gravel echoed from the driveway. A quiet convoy rolled in, no sirens, no license plates, just one thing displayed on their windshields: color-printed HOA ID cards, laminated and slightly crooked, like they were made at the local copy shop. 3 black SUVs pulled up and parked with the precision of a semi-military drill. 6 people stepped out, all dressed in matching khaki uniforms, radios clipped to their belts, steel-toed boots on their feet, and wielding what they clearly considered their greatest weapon, clipboards. Not a warrant in sight, just folders neatly tucked under their arms, like they were about to inventory a warehouse, not step onto private land. Leading the group was a woman I'd never met, but recognized instantly. That had to be Karen. Branded windbreaker, oversized sunglasses, and a smile so rehearsed it could have been part of a campaign commercial. "Good morning," she said, voice syrupy but laced with threat. "We're here to conduct phase 2 of the compliance evaluation." I took a sip of coffee and met her gaze. Must have lost phase 1 in the mail. No one laughed. They began spreading out, one heading toward the goat pen, another launching a drone like they were surveying a military base. A third walked the fence line, jotting down notes like they were collecting evidence for prosecution. I stepped off my porch, hands in the pocket of my hoodie. One of them froze when they saw me, then muttered to his partner, "Don't let him interfere." I just smiled. Interfere? I'm walking on my own land. The line between impersonation and abuse of power had never been blurrier, but I didn't need to prove anything. All I had to do was let them make enough mistakes and have the right witness watching when they did. I hadn't even finished cleaning the muddy footprints left by the so-called compliance team on my dirt road when my phone buzzed. No caller ID, no greeting. Just a voice, cold, overly polished, like it had been trained in a multi-level marketing seminar. "Mr. Grayson, I'm calling to confirm that you've received the official notice." I gripped the phone tightly. "You mean the thing nailed to my gate like a wartime warning? That's what you're calling a notice?" "Nailed is a strong word," she replied, still dripping with honeyed condescension. "We simply affixed it in a visible location, and it is entirely valid under emergency expansion guidelines." "Guidelines?" I snapped. "I was never invited to any meeting to vote on this so-called expansion." "That's correct," Karen said, and for the first time, a hint of sharpness crept into her tone. "The meeting was for residents of Simmons Valley." "I don't live in Simmons Valley." "You do now." Click. The call ended, like a blade severing whatever fake civility had remained. That night, as I walked the boundary of my land, my flashlight caught a row of bright orange plastic stakes, brand new, perfectly aligned like chess pieces on a battlefield. I hadn't placed them, and judging by how one of my goats was chewing on a flag like it was staging a protest, they weren't welcome. I pulled one stake out. Beneath it, scrawled in black marker, were GPS coordinates. They weren't just threatening. They were redrawing the map, literally. The next morning, I drove straight to the county office and filed a formal complaint for impersonating public officials. The clerk skimmed the paperwork, then raised an eyebrow. "You're the 12th. 12th? I asked. "Most just give up. Pay the fine. Move on." I pressed my lips together. "I'm not most people." She nodded once, then silently slid a handwritten note across the counter. 3 words and a phone number. Sheriff Eli Grayson, my brother. That night, I sat on the porch, holding the forged notice in one hand, my mind heavy with the weight of everything that had unfolded. The only thing I trusted at that moment was the incoming call from my brother, Eli Grayson, the county sheriff. I read him every line of the notice, recounted each step of the so-called inspection team, and even described the smug expression on Karen's face. On the other end of the line, Eli was unsettlingly silent. "You already know about this, don't you?" I asked. "You're not the first," he said, "but your case is different." "Different how?" "They sent fake documents, fake personnel, built a damn barricade on my land." "This isn't just about fences or fines," he replied. "It's about control and what they plan to do next." I waited for him to go on, but all I heard was a long, tired sigh. "This isn't something we should talk about over the phone." In that moment, it clicked. Karen wasn't acting alone, and this wasn't just a power trip from an overzealous HOA. It was an organized campaign with targets and a blueprint. Eli went on to reveal that Karen had pulled the same stunt before, with someone else. Same approach, same violation notices, same honey-dipped threats. That person had been forcibly removed from their land just 2 weeks after refusing to cooperate. That farm? It now claimed to be community use, but in reality, it was a private luxury retreat, owned by none other than Karen. I set the phone down, heart pounding, like I'd just realized the intruder wasn't outside my door, but already had 1 foot in the house. I opened the safe, pulled out my land survey map, marked every new stake they'd planted, snapped photos, and sent them to Eli. His reply came quickly, just 1 line. "You're the first move. If they beat you, the rest will fall." I knew better than anyone. This land wasn't just where I lived. It was my father's legacy. The last thing anchoring me in a world that's slowly losing its way. And I knew one more thing. Karen just picked the wrong man to fight. 6:42 a.m. I was pouring my coffee when the sound of a loudspeaker echoed through the valley like a train horn announcing something irreversible. "This is the Simmons Valley HOA compliance unit. Property owner is requested to step out of the house immediately." I nearly spilled the whole pot, not out of fear, but from sheer disbelief, partly because of how outrageous the command was, and partly because of the brazen confidence behind it, this time far more calculated than before. I stepped onto the porch wearing a t-shirt that read, "Fence me in, I dare you." And there before me, like a scene from some off-brand dystopian film, were 4 black trucks lined up across the gravel road. No license plates, just crooked duct-taped labels reading Civic Enforcement, Simmons Valley Compliance Division. 6 people stepped out, dressed like police officers, but missing everything that made them legitimate. No badges, no warrants, no legal justification. And then, as if on cue from a script, Karen emerged. Same designer outfit, same oversized sunglasses covering half her face, and in her hands, a laminated folder like some kind of royal decree. "We're here to carry out Phase 2, she smiled, as if she were leading a morning yoga session instead of a hostile land takeover. I took a sip of coffee, calm as if watching a comedy skit. Phase 1 must have landed in my spam folder. Karen didn't wait for a response. She waved her crew into action. 2 headed toward the barn, 1 launched a drone, another began measuring the fence like he was preparing blueprints for a construction project. What they didn't know was that every step they took had just triggered the new alert system I'd installed overnight. I stepped off the porch, hands still in my hoodie. They hesitated, unclear whether it was caution or fear of being caught on camera. One of them tried to move forward. "Sir, please don't interfere," he said. "I'm just walking," I replied, the corner of my mouth curling like a silent blade. "Or are you planning to arrest me for the crime of standing?" Karen stepped closer, her smile beginning to crack. "We have the right to inspect, verify, and enforce against non-compliant structures, unregistered livestock enclosures, unauthorized electrical hookups, and improper animal husbandry." "Funny," I cut in, "because that barn's been standing for 3 generations. Those goats were born here, and the electricity, certified by the county. Want to see the papers?" She ignored me. 2 of her crew started approaching the barn. I let out a long, sharp whistle. The goats, God bless them, let out a deafening bleat and charged like a wool-covered army on a mission. One of the men yelled and stumbled backward. "They don't like strangers," I said, shrugging, "especially the kind with radios." Karen lifted her phone and began recording, forcing a strained smile. More evidence of aggressive behavior from a non-compliant resident. I looked straight into her camera. "Smile for the subpoena, Karen. This video's going to court." And just as the air thickened with tension, a real police cruiser rolled up. Lights on, markings clear. No duct tape involved. The door opened, and out stepped Deputy Chief Ramirez, calm and confident. The kind of authority you don't have to fake. The air seemed to freeze the moment the patrol car came to a full stop on the dirt road. Karen turned her head, and for the first time, there was hesitation in her eyes. Deputy Chief Ramirez stepped out with the calm authority of someone who didn't need to raise his voice to make others stop in their tracks. "What exactly is going on here?" he asked, his gaze sweeping over the khaki-clad crowd, standing awkwardly with their drones and clipboards. Karen quickly stepped forward, her voice still sweet, but now tinged with something less certain. We're conducting a lawful enforcement inspection under the expansion clause of the Simmons Valley HOA. This land now falls under our jurisdiction. Ramirez turned to me. Did you invite these people onto your property? I pointed at Karen, still holding my coffee. I didn't even invite her to read a map. And did you consent to any inspection of your property? Absolutely not. Ramirez nodded, then turned back to Karen, his voice dropping low, heavy, like a boulder sinking into still water. Then they're trespassing on private property, and any drone activity over this area is a direct violation of federal agricultural airspace regulations. Karen's grip tightened on her designer tote, and her tone sharpened. This is absurd. We have full documentation. Unless that documentation includes a judge's signature, Ramirez cut in, it holds no legal authority. Ma'am, I'm going to ask you and your team to leave the premises immediately. Karen didn't answer. Instead, she leaned in close to me, speaking just loud enough for only me to hear. I hope your niece enjoys applying for scholarships from land riddled with violations. I tightened my grip on the coffee cup. I didn't reply. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of knowing that her words sent a chill straight through my spine. But inside, something clicked into place. She wasn't just arrogant, she was a threat, and I was done playing by her dirty rules. Karen's team began backing away, step by reluctant step. One of them glanced toward the barn, his eyes briefly meeting mine, and in that second, I saw it. Doubt, maybe even regret. But Karen's sharp whisper cut through the moment, and his expression vanished, replaced by blank obedience. I stood there, watching as their convoy retreated, dust billowing behind their wheels. I hadn't had breakfast, but I knew one thing for sure. This was the last time they would come here without consequences. I thought that after that dramatic morning, I'd have at least a moment of peace, enough time to regroup, to plan my counterattack. But I was wrong. The biggest threat didn't come from beyond the gate. It had already been inside the whole time. It started with small things, a wrench left in the wrong place, the back gate to the barn swinging open, even though I knew I'd locked it, the wire fence, which I'd tightened the night before, sagging like someone had deliberately loosened it. I blamed the goats for messing around, until Maggie, the craftiest one of the bunch, ended up out by the road with a bright orange survey flag clamped in her mouth, like she was delivering evidence. That's when I started paying closer attention. And then it happened. Not once, but 3 times, the power cut out. No storms, no grid issues. Each time, the outage perfectly aligned with my barn cameras, uploading data to the cloud. That wasn't coincidence anymore. That was sabotage. I dug into the system logs, reviewed every shift, every name. One kept showing up. Darren, hired just 2 months ago. A quiet guy, recommended by a neighbor as hardworking and low maintenance. But lately, he'd started asking too many questions about the backup generators, the Wi-Fi relays, even the camera positions and where I kept the safe. Once, I caught him walking past the side barn, holding his phone awkwardly against his chest. The screen was on, and the camera wasn't facing outward. It was aimed up, toward the loft, where I kept sensitive documents. I needed proof. So I set a trap, a decoy storage shed with a sign taped to the door that read, "Property Transfer Documents, Confidential." Inside, nothing but blank paper. I left the door slightly ajar. 3 days later, everything was gone. No questions asked, no knocks on the door, no permission, and I didn't confront him. I waited. Then, at 11:17 p.m. on Thursday night, the well cam pinged, motion detected. I pulled up the live stream, and there he was, Darren. Hood pulled low, crossbody bag slung tight, flashlight in hand, moving like he owned the place. I reached for the only thing I needed, my heavy-duty metal flashlight, and stepped out into the cold, silent dark. I intercepted him near the pump station, where the moonlight was just bright enough to catch the cracks forming in his guilty expression. Darren spun around, startled like he'd been caught in broad daylight. His flashlight hit the dirt. His bag slipped off his shoulder. He took 1 step back, ready to bolt. I didn't chase. I charged. We tore across the southern field, trampling over fresh goat prints still pressed into the mud. Darren was fast, but this was my land. I knew every slope, every underground pipe, and I knew he'd trip over the irrigation line near the tree line. He did, face first into the mud. I closed in, my voice low but sharp enough to freeze the night itself. "Start explaining." "It's not what you think," he panted, raising his hands in surrender. "Then you've got 10 seconds to say something smart, or you'll be sharing a cell with Karen." Silence. Then suddenly, no begging, no apologies, just rage. "You think you're some kind of hero?" he spat. "You're squatting on stolen land. Karen showed me everything. Old contracts, deed records. It used to belong to the community. Your family cheated the system, took it before anyone could stop them." I stood frozen for a beat. "She said, my father stole this land?" "She didn't say it. She showed me," he snapped. "She said if you didn't hand it over, you'd ruin everything. You're the risk. You had to be dealt with." Cutting fences, sabotaging power, stealing documents. Is that how you serve the community? Darren said nothing. I grabbed the bag and unzipped it. Inside, a burner phone, a tablet, and a hand-drawn map of my property, detailed down to the inch. Every weak spot marked, blind spots in the camera system, loose points in the fence, access paths to the well, the backup generator's location. At the bottom, underlined twice in red, eviction activation, November 4th. I powered up the tablet. It opened straight into a folder labeled Phase 3, Grayson. Inside was everything. Snapshots pulled from my own security cams, energy consumption charts, cross-reference deed files, and finally, an assessment of resident threat level report. I read the final line out loud for Darren to hear. Recommend escalation of enforcement, including civil litigation under expanded HOA clause. Approved by Karen. At that moment, all doubt vanished. This wasn't just about one piece of land. It was a calculated operation, a coordinated campaign, and I was their test subject. I didn't sleep that night, not because of the adrenaline from the chase, but because of what I found in Darren's bag. It shook my world to the core. A land transfer agreement, bearing my name, my signature, complete with a county-approved seal, dated 3 weeks ago. Only one problem, I never signed anything. I climbed to the loft in silence, opened my father's old safe. Inside was the original land deed, thick, yellowed with age, still bearing his handwritten signature in fountain pen ink. I laid the real deed next to the forgery. Everything matched. Layout, serial number, even the typewriter font. Except for one thing. The real one had a genuine signature. The fake? A scanned image, pasted in, and the name listed as co-owner on the forgery, Mason Ridge Holdings, a company I'd never heard of. Yet somehow, on paper, they now owned half my farm. I called Eli in the middle of the night. When he saw the forged document, he exhaled, slow and heavy. "This isn't just HOA overreach anymore," he said. "This is legal forgery, facilitated by someone inside the county office. This is bigger than we thought." We spread every document across the barn floor, the same spot where my father used to sit, drinking black coffee from a dented tin mug, reading the morning paper. Buried among his old files was something I'd never paid attention to, a land purchase proposal from 30 years ago. The applicant, Karen. Back then, just a low-level employee at a fledgling real estate firm. Her proposal had been denied for environmental concerns, zoning conflicts, and structural impact. My father had circled her name in red ink and scribbled a note in the margin. "She'll be back." Not with a company, but with paperwork. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about power. It was about a grudge, one that had been festering for 3 decades. Karen had waited all this time for revenge, and this time, she didn't come with an offer. She came with forged documents and a clipboard. I sat there in the darkness, heart pounding. Not from fear, but from rage so hot it burned in my chest. She didn't just want my land. She wanted to erase every trace that I, and my family, ever existed here. The next morning, I pried up the wooden plank in the corner of the barn, right where my father used to stash anything too important to trust to locks. Beneath layers of dust and dry straw was a faded metal box. The red lettering on it was almost gone, but I could still make it out. Mule dust. To anyone else, it would have sounded meaningless. But to me, it was a code. When I was 9, I once asked my dad what eminent domain meant. He winced, gave a crooked smile, and said, "That's when the government calls land theft progress." Inside the box was everything he'd ever collected: zoning maps, land title verifications, protest petitions from the 80s, and a thick notebook titled in his own handwriting, "Land Disputes, Settled and Unsettled." Almost every legal entry had one name written in bold red ink, again and again: Karen. I flipped to the section marked February 1991. There it was, a proposal for a luxury residential development. Tennis courts, security gates, clubhouse with gym. Right here on this land. The proposer? Karen. Back then, just a junior associate. The proposal was rejected due to environmental concerns and soil instability, but my father, with the instincts of a farmer who'd been burned by land laws more than once, scribbled in the margin, "Won't quit, will come back, not with a company, but with paperwork." His words, prophetic. That night, Eli brought over a black leather folder. Inside, a leaked HOA meeting transcript from the previous year. It outlined every move, each one chilling in its precision. Monitor landowner activity. Initiate mail rerouting campaign. Rezone barn as future utility station. And the most disturbing, if resistance, promote rumors of mental instability. They didn't just want my land, they wanted me erased. I wasn't waiting any longer. I made 4 full backups. All the documents, video footage, Darren's map, everything. 3 I sent to local newspapers. The 4th, I left right on Karen's doorstep, along with a single handwritten note. Still not yours. Less than 3 hours after I left the documents on her porch, Karen fired back with a video. A short clip, HOA banner in the background, her face front and center. But this wasn't the confident Karen I'd seen before. Her hair was neatly combed, her lips quivered slightly, and her voice tried to sound firm, but trembled beneath the surface. Certain individuals in our community are spreading false information in an effort to defame me. I have never been involved in any illegal activity. This is a coordinated smear campaign. The video lasted 1 minute and 30 seconds. It was taken down 3 hours later. Too late. I'd already saved it. So had over 80,000 others. The reaction? You could call it a community earthquake, and you wouldn't be exaggerating. The comment section under the reposted video by the local paper was a firestorm of fury and sarcasm. Blink twice if you're lying. Nobody trusts someone who rolls with a squad dressed like knockoff SWAT. HOA now stands for Harass Our Agriculture. And then, the day of reckoning came. 9:04 a.m. 5 black SUVs rolled into my driveway like a tactical raid. No more pretending. 8 people stepped out in fake uniforms. One clutched a clipboard like it was a sidearm. Another wore a GoPro, like they were filming for a propaganda docuseries. And Karen, same beige blazer, but this time, the pride in her eyes was gone. All that remained was stubbornness. "Mr. Grayson," she called out, her voice booming as if she wanted the whole valley to hear, "you've left us no choice. Under emergency administrative provision, this land is now under direct control of the HOA, pending full inspection." I stood on the porch, arms crossed. Sounds official, but unless what you're holding has a judge's signature, it's just fancy printer paper. Karen gave a curt nod, a signal. 2 of her goons circled toward the back. Another approached the barn, crowbar in hand. They'd taken the bait. I snapped my fingers. Plan B activated. Motion sensors around the perimeter flared to life. Floodlights burst on. Then the speakers boomed with a commanding voice. "This is Sheriff Eli Grayson. This property is under investigation. All trespassers are being recorded and will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." Karen jolted. 2 of her henchmen stumbled back. One dropped the crowbar. Another fumbled with his radio. She said we had permission. But the real blow didn't come from the speakers. It came from behind them. A man stepped across the boundary line. Don Wallace, my neighbor to the west. Wide-brimmed hat, polished leather boots, and a thick folder under one arm. "Ms. Karen," he said calmly, like he was asking for a cup of sugar, "you've just crossed onto my land." Karen forced a smile. "This is Simmons Valley territory." "No," Don replied, raising the folder, "and this is a court-approved restraining order, signed this morning." It takes effect immediately." Karen froze, but Don wasn't done. He leaned in just enough for everyone to hear. "And the judge who signed it?" "She lives 2 blocks behind me." The final answer didn't come from Karen's mouth. It came from the sound of police car doors swinging open in unison, like the final strike of a judge's gavel. 4 county patrol cars rolled into the driveway, their quiet arrival somehow louder than any siren. No yelling, no drama, just solemn, decisive force. Eli stepped out first, standing like a man who had waited his whole life for this moment. In his hand was a folder with a bright red seal, and in his voice was the kind of calm that silences everything else. "Karen Whitaker," he said, "you are under arrest for the following charges: forgery of public documents, impersonation of law enforcement, trespassing on private property, and multiple state-level civil violations." Karen froze, then gave a smug little laugh. "You don't have the authority." "Judge Brody signed the arrest warrant this morning," Eli replied, holding up the folder, "along with a search warrant for your vehicle." The smirk vanished. Karen spun toward her crew, searching for a loyal face. But no one met her gaze. One man removed his cap and stood still. Another, the youngest in the group, raised a trembling hand. "If I tell you everything, do I count as a whistleblower?" Eli nodded. "If you talk fast." And just like that, it all fell apart, like a row of dominoes tipping one by one. One peeled off his radio. Another sat down on the curb, head in his hands. The self-proclaimed compliance enforcement team now looked more like school kids caught cheating on a test, waiting for the consequences. Karen didn't resist. She didn't scream. She simply bowed her head as the cold metal of the handcuffs locked around her wrists. Her eyes, once so full of pride, were now hollow, like someone who just realized the script in her head had reached the final page. Neighbors began to gather. The once silent now held up phones, filming, snapping photos. A little girl shouted, "She's the one who fined my family for Halloween lights." Mrs. Delaney rolled up to the gate in her golf cart, iced tea in hand, raising the cup like a toast. "Told y'all, HOA Hitler, the original." But as Karen was led away, I didn't feel relief. I felt hollow. Because in that moment, when the hands of justice finally closed around her, I knew something deeper. She wasn't the architect. She was just the tool. And I was about to find out who held the blueprint. The SUV carrying Karen disappeared around the bend, leaving behind no more boot prints on gravel, no more clipboards peeking through fences. But I didn't go back inside. I stood there, silent, like a gatekeeper for the history of this land, because I knew the battle was over. But the war was just beginning. Eli was collecting evidence when one of his deputies called out, "You're going to want to see this." It was a tablet hidden in Karen's vehicle, security lock already bypassed, no emails, no threatening videos, just a single file title, reassignment, pilot zone, Midwest beta, and a set of coordinates. I looked at the numbers, not my land, not Simmons Valley, somewhere 2 counties over, another farm, another target, another invasion, already in motion. I didn't wait for permission. I got in my truck and drove, following the numbers glowing on the screen. That's where I met Grace Harlow, early 40s, rake in hand, dust on her face, and eyes that didn't have time for nonsense. "I don't need to scan a QR code," she said flatly as I pulled up. "I'm not here for that," I said, popping open my glove box and pulling out a copy of the forged documents I once received. "I'm here to warn you." Grace read. Her face went pale. She didn't say a word, just turned, went inside, and came back with a yellow envelope. Inside, an identical letter, same title, same language, same company, Mason Ridge Holdings. She'd already been marked, and likely had already stepped into phase 1 before realizing what was happening. We sent the documents to the State Attorney General's office immediately. Within 3 weeks, Grace filed an emergency injunction, blocking any enforcement action on her land. And then more people came forward. 4 other farmers across 3 states, same company, same strategy, same inside-out assault. Karen had only been Chapter 1. The script belonged to something bigger, anonymous, sophisticated, calculated. I sent everything to a federal investigator. They didn't promise anything, just said, "Stay quiet and stay safe." My farm still stands. The gates are reinforced. The cameras no longer point down. They scan the horizon. The goats, back to their favorite job, chewing survey flags and headbutting anything that moves. I'm no longer the man who just fixes fences and checks the weather. I'm a survivor, a keeper of the fire. And if I have to, I'll be the one to light the next flame to expose the truth. 1 month later, I got a black envelope, no return address. Inside was a card, embossed with a triangle inside a roofline, and new coordinates. I didn't burn it, didn't race toward it. I logged it and tucked it away, right where my father once hid mule dust. Because I know, someday someone will need it, and when they do, they won't be starting from zero. In a world where power increasingly hides behind layers of paperwork and official titles, clarity and steadfastness remain the final weapons of ordinary people. The story of a farmer targeted by a fraudulent HOA wasn't just a legal battle. It was a living reminder of a deeper truth. Ownership is not merely a matter of documents. It's about connection, memory, and the unshakable will to protect what was built with sweat and trust. In today's society, we often believe injustice comes from large, visible forces, governments, corporations, systems. But sometimes it starts smaller, a misprinted letter, a confident yet hollow voice, a neighbor who thinks they know what's best for you. And when those little things go unchallenged, they grow, infiltrate, and eventually become power disguised as community. The greatest message this story leaves behind is this: never underestimate the power of standing up. You don't have to be strong from the start. You just have to refuse to back down when something doesn't feel right. The protagonist wasn't a lawyer, wasn't a politician. He was just a man who loved his land, loved the peace it brought, and cherished the memory of his father. But that love made him the last barrier against a rotten system trying to spread its roots. This lesson applies to anyone. The mother, pressured to change how she raises her child. The worker coerced into signing an unfair contract. The farmer threatened with land seizure in the name of progress. In every case, knowing your rights, saving your evidence, and believing in the truth can mean the difference between loss and justice. And if there's one thing worth remembering, it's this: when the bad guys want to take something from you, they don't start with force, they start with paper. And if you don't read it, don't question it, don't push back, you can be erased from your own rights, legally. So let this story serve as a reminder. Power doesn't come from uniforms or rubber stamps. It comes from the unwavering spirit of those who believe that truth cannot be rewritten in forged ink. If today's story resonated with you, whether it stirred anger at injustice, admiration for one man's courage, or simply a renewed belief that truth still matters, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel so you can join us on future journeys. What did you think about the protagonist? About how he stood his ground against a force that seemed unstoppable? Leave a comment below, whether it's praise, critique, or your personal reflections. We deeply value your honest voice, because sometimes it's the smallest conversations that spark the biggest changes. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.